Welcome to the next installment in my video lecture series in economics. And in this particular video lecture, I'm going to be taking a look at some of the other determinants of demand. In a previous video lecture, I looked at the relationship between price and quantity demanded. Now we're going to introduce other determinants that impact the demand curve. As always, I like to try to give the appropriate attribution for any information that I used, and this slide here gives you the sources for any of the quotes that I use in this particular presentation. So as always, we generally have to have an understanding of different terms that economists use and what economists mean when they use that term. So something that's going to be important with respect to the determinants of demand is income and wealth. For income is the sum of all households' wages, salaries, profits, interest payments, rents, and other forms of earnings in a given time period. So wages would be your hourly wages. A salary would be if you were a salaried employee. Any profits that you have, let's say you have your own business, and any profits that you earn are considered income. Any interest payments, if you put money in a bank and have a savings account, any interest payments that you receive. Rents being any leasing payments you get for property, or if you lend out or lease out equipment. And any other forms of earnings in a given time period. Wealth, on the other hand, is the total value of what a household owns minus what it owes. So this is taking a look at overall what the amount of assets that you have, less the liabilities that you have. That is considered your wealth. Just realize moving forward that I'm going to be exclusively talking about income, but wealth also, you could place wealth in place of income for the analysis that's going to be forthcoming. A few other terms we have to distinguish between normal and inferior goods. All right, a normal good is a good for which demand goes up when income is higher and for which demand decreases when income is lower. All right, I oftentimes use the example of restaurant meals being a normal good. As people's incomes go up, they have a tendency to go out to eat more frequently. So it is considered a normal good because as income goes up, the demand for that particular product also goes up. An inferior good is the opposite of a normal good. It's a good for which demand tends to fall when income rises. The example I give for an inferior good is ramen noodles could be considered an inferior good. All right, I think many college students rely on ramen noodles as a staple of their diet. And once you graduate, start your career, see your income increasing, many students decrease the amount of ramen noodles that they purchase as their income goes up. So for any good that when your income goes up, you have the tendency to purchase less of it, is considered an inferior good. So those are two of the factors that are important. Make sure you remember what a normal good is and what an inferior good is. And with a normal good, just remember there's a positive relationship between demand and income. If your income goes up, your demand increases. If your income goes down, your demand decreases. An inferior good is the opposite. There's a negative relationship between demand and income. As your income goes up, your demand for that product has a tendency to decrease. A few other terms that we need for this particular video lecture are substitute goods and complementary goods. A substitute good are goods that can serve as replacements for one another. When the price of one increases, demand for the other increases. So for example, I consider Coca-Cola and Pepsi to be substitute goods for one another. They're not perfect substitutes, all right? I can distinguish between Pepsi and Coca-Cola most times. Probably even in a blind taste test, I can tell the difference between the two. So for example, I consider Coca-Cola and Pepsi to be substitute goods. So for example, let's say I generally drink Coca-Cola. If Pepsi were to go down significantly in price, I would substitute away from Coca-Cola to Pepsi because Pepsi is relatively cheaper than Coca-Cola. So remember that. that substitute goods are replacements for one another. And if we're talking about good A and good B being substitute goods for one another, and I'm analyzing the market for good A, if the price of good B changes and they're substitutes for one another, that's going to impact the demand for good A. Also, complementary goods, goods that have a tendency to go together. A decrease in the price of one results in the increase in demand for the other, and vice versa. So, for example, if you purchase a car, all right, when you purchase a car and you use a car, you have to buy gasoline, you have to buy car insurance, you have to pay for the services of someone to fix that car, etc. Excuse me. So remember that there's goods that have a tendency to go together. If you're a gamer, if you buy an Xbox, a complementary good would be the games that you use on the Xbox. All right. If you buy a computer, a printer, paper, programs that you use on the computer are all complementary to that computer. So make sure you keep these terms straight in your head, because we're going to need these terms, normal and inferior goods, substitute, complementary goods, etc., because we're building towards understanding supply and demand so we can understand how the market mechanism works. And these are the types of things you need to understand to analyze how a market changes. You might be told that good A and B are substitutes. You're analyzing the market of good A and the price of B changes. You need to know what happens to the demand curve in order to accurately analyze what's going to happen to the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity in that particular market. So I've listed out all of the determinants. We already talked about income and wealth. We talked about the prices of other goods and services. Also realize that people's tastes and preferences change over time, and this will determine what happens to the demand curve. All right. So, for example, when I was younger, not very many people had tattoos. There wasn't a great demand for tattoos. Now tattoos are relatively commonplace. So people's tastes and preferences have changed over time. All right. More and more people demand tattoos. So remember, tastes and preferences can change. People's tastes and preferences can change because of a news item. Maybe there's some news saying that this particular food has beneficial health properties that would increase people's demand for that product. All right. Or there's a negative connotation with eating a particular product. Maybe it's linked to cancer or other ailments, and people shift away from buying that product. And also your expectations about what's going to happen in the future. All right. So, for example, if you're a purchaser of a particular good and in 6 months' time there's an expectation that the price will dramatically increase in the future, that'll impact your demand today. You'll want to buy more of it now to avoid the price increase in the future. Here is a demand schedule. So this is a demand schedule for Alex that we used previously in another video lecture. And let's say that here is her original demand schedule. So here's the price and the original quantity demanded. And let's say that Alex graduates from college or university and has a dramatic increase in her income. You can see that the quantity demanded for every single price has increased because of the increase in her income. So previously, when gasoline was $8 a gallon, she wasn't buying, or he wasn't buying, any gasoline. But now with the higher income, they would willingly purchase 3 gallons of gasoline, where before the income increase, they didn't want to purchase anything. So that you can see for every single price quantity combination, the increase in income has caused quantity demanded to increase. So let's take a look at what this looks like graphically. Here's the original demand curve for Alex before the increase in the income, or whatever has caused the increase in demand. And what we want to take a look at is, what does this new demand curve look like? So all we're going to do is we're going to take the prices and now plot out the new quantity demanded related to this change in income, let's say, for Alex. So you can see that every single one of the quantities is increasing for every price. So for every price, the quantity demanded is increasing for Alex because of this change in demand. And if we connect those points, we can see that the demand curve has shifted to the right. So because of this change in one of the determinants of demand, the location of the demand curve physically changes its location. We're not moving from one point to another on a pre-existing demand curve, but this change in the determinant of demand is causing the entire demand curve to change its location. So we have a new demand curve. We have demand zero, the original demand curve and the new demand curve. So make sure you're aware of that these determinants that I just went over, these other determinants, physically cause a demand curve either to shift to the right or to shift to the left. So let me go through a few examples of this and some of the things you might see here. Let's say you're asked to show what happens to this demand curve D0 when there's an increase in income for a normal good. Remember, there's a positive relationship between income and the demand for a normal good. So if income is increasing, the demand for that good is increasing. So the demand curve shifts to the right when there's an increase in income for a normal good. Let's take a look at the opposite. Let's say this is a normal good and this is the demand curve that represents the demand for this normal good, and we see income decreasing. This will cause the demand curve to shift to the left. All right? So make sure you're comfortable with which direction the demand curve shifts under these different scenarios and understanding what a normal good is and what does that mean when income changes and how does that impact the demand curve. Let's shift this to an inferior good. What happens when there's a decrease in income for an inferior good? Remember, there's an inverse relationship between income and the demand for an inferior good. So as income goes down, the demand is going to increase. By definition, that is what an inferior good is. That's why I went over those definitions, because this is directly going to tell you what's going to happen to the demand curve when income changes. You need to know if it's a normal or an inferior good. Also, let's take a look at it. We have the same inferior good, but income is increasing. Again, income and the demand for an inferior good move in opposite directions. So an increase in income will cause the demand curve to shift to the left. We shift to the price of related goods. So here we're analyzing the market for good A. So this is the demand for good A, but we are changing the price of B. And I'm telling you that A and B are substitutes for one another. So if we're analyzing the market of A and the price of B goes up and A and B are substitutes, people are going to substitute away from B and start purchasing more of A. So we are going to see the demand curve shift to the right. Continuing, let's lower the price of B. So this is the market for good A. The price of B is declining and A and B are substitutes. Now people are going to substitute away from A over to B because B is less expensive now. So this causes the demand for good A to shift to the left. Let's take a look at for complementary goods. So again, we're talking about the market for good A and we're changing the price of B. We're lowering the price of B, and goods A and B are complements. They have a tendency to be used together. So if the price of B declines, that means people are going to buy more of A, because as they buy more of B, they're also going to buy more of A at the given prices of A. This causes the demand curve to shift to the right. And our last scenario here is that we have A and B as complements. We're analyzing the market for good A. This is the demand for A. If we increase the price of B, that means A and B are used together. As the price of B goes up, it's going to be more expensive for individuals to use good A. So the demand curve is going to shift to the left. So make sure you're comfortable with A, the terms normal and inferior good. What does that mean? What does it mean when price or income changes when we're trying to analyze a situation involving a normal good. Also know the difference between a complementary good and a substitute good, and how a price change of a related good is going to impact the demand for good A. So if A and B are related to one another, how does the change in the price of B impact the demand for good A?